Neve Ashford had imagined 1,000 versions of how her marriage might end. A battlefield. A betrayal whispered behind closed doors. A slow, creeping distance that turned shared silence into something unbearable. She had never imagined it would end like this. Seated at the high table in the great hall of Blackmere Keep, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, her face arranged into the careful mask she had perfected over 3 years of being Luna to the most powerful alpha on the continent, while her husband stood before 400 wolves and announced that another woman's child would inherit his throne. The hall was full, every seat occupied, every torch lit. The long banners of the Blackmere crest hung from the rafters, black and silver thread catching the firelight. It was a formal convocation, the kind Soren called once or twice a year to address the pack on matters of territory or law. Neve had dressed for it carefully. The deep green gown that Soren had once told her made her eyes look like forest glass, the silver comb in her hair that had belonged to his mother. She had spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror, making sure every detail was right, because Aluna's appearance was a message, and she had wanted the message to be, "I am steady. I am here. I belong." She did not know what he was going to say. He had not told her. That, in hindsight, should have been the warning. Soren stood at the front of the hall, tall and broad, his dark hair catching the torchlight, his jaw set in the expression Neve had come to recognize as his public face. Hard, certain, unreachable. He spoke about the future of the pack, about legacy, about the bloodline's obligation to endure. His voice carried to every corner without effort. 400 wolves listened in absolute silence. And then he said the name. Daria Ven. Neve's heart stopped. Not a stutter. Not a skip. A full cessation, like the organ had simply forgotten its purpose. The hall seemed to tilt, the torchlight sliding sideways, the stone floor becoming uncertain beneath her chair. Daria Ven, whose child, a boy born 7 weeks ago, Soren was now formally recognizing as his firstborn son. Daria Ven, whose child Soren was now declaring heir to the Blackmere line. The silence in the hall changed. It went from respectful attention to stunned, disbelieving quiet. 400 heads turned, not toward Soren, but toward Neve. Every single gaze landed on her like a physical weight. The pity was the worst part. She could feel it pressing against her skin, thick and suffocating. The entire pack watching the Luna receive the news that her husband had fathered a child with someone else and chosen that child over her. Neve did not flinch. She did not gasp or cry or let her hands tremble. She had been a foundling raised in the pack's communal halls. She had learned very young that showing pain was an invitation for more of it. So she sat perfectly still, her face a mask of porcelain composure, and watched her husband dismantle her life one careful sentence at a time. He did not look at her, not once during the entire announcement. His gaze swept the hall, touched his advisors, his generals, the row of elders along the east wall. It never landed on her. That was how she knew it was deliberate. That he had chosen not to warn her because he knew she would have fought it, and he had decided her objection was not worth hearing. The announcement ended. Soren sat down. The hall erupted into murmurs that sounded like the ocean pulling back before a wave. Someone was speaking to her. One of the elder wives, leaning close, her face creased with concern. Neve could not hear the words. There was a ringing in her ears, high and thin, like a glass about to shatter. She stood. The movement was smooth, controlled. She inclined her head to the elder wife, a gesture that meant nothing and everything, and she walked out of the great hall. She did not run. Aluna does not run. She walked, her back straight, her chin level, her gown trailing behind her on the stone floor. She walked through the corridor and up the staircase and through the door of the chambers she shared with Soren, and she closed the door behind her, and she locked it. Then she pressed her back against the wood and slid to the floor. The sob came out of her like something torn loose, a raw, wretched sound that she pressed her fist against her mouth to contain, because even now, even alone, she could not allow herself to be loud about it. The tears came fast and hot, blurring the room into watercolor, and she wrapped her arms around herself and dropped her forehead to her knees. Her hand found her stomach. Low, just below the navel. She pressed her palm flat against the barely there curve that no one had noticed yet. Not Soren, not the healers, not a single soul in the pack. 6 weeks along. She had been waiting for the right moment to tell him, had imagined his face when she said the words, had pictured foolishly the rare and devastating smile he saved for moments that genuinely moved him. Now the right moment would never come, because the man she loved had just told 400 people that another woman's child was his legacy, and Neve was not going to raise her child in the shadow of that declaration. She was not going to watch her baby grow up as the second choice, the afterthought, the lesser heir. She stood. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She pulled a traveling pack from the bottom of the wardrobe and began to fill it with efficient, deliberate movements. 2 changes of clothes, her healer's journal, the dried herb pouch she carried everywhere, the small knife Soren had given her on their first anniversary, because she could not bring herself to leave it behind, even now. She removed the silver comb from her hair and placed it on his pillow. She pulled her bonding ring from her finger, the simple silver band he had slipped on 3 years ago with hands that shook, and set it on top of the comb. The ring caught the moonlight, and for one terrible, wavering moment, she almost slid it back on. She didn't. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept across the floor of the Alpha's chambers, Neve Ashford was gone. Soren Blackmere woke to an empty bed and thought nothing of it. Neve rose early. She always had, even before they were mated. He would reach for her in the half-dark and find cool sheets and the fading trace of her scent, lavender and something warmer beneath it that he had never been able to name, and he would lie there for a few minutes, letting the remnants of her fill his lungs before the day demanded he become someone harder. This morning, the sheets were cold, not cool. Cold, like no one had slept in them for hours. He frowned and sat up. The room was still dim, the curtains drawn. The fire burned down to ash. Her robe was not on the chair where she always left it. Her boots were not by the door. Then he saw the ring. It sat on his pillow, centered with a precision that felt deliberate, the silver band resting on top of the comb that had belonged to his mother. For a long moment, Soren stared at it without comprehension, the way a man stares at a wound before the pain arrives. Then the understanding hit, and it hit like a blade between the ribs. He was on his feet before the next breath. He crossed to the wardrobe and pulled the doors open. Her clothes were there, all of them except the things she would take if she were leaving and not coming back. The sturdy wool dress, the lined cloak, the leather boots meant for distance. Soren's chest tightened. He told himself she was upset, that she had gone to the gardens or down to the river, where she sometimes walked when she needed to think, that she would be back by midday, angry but present, and they would argue, and he would explain why the declaration had been necessary, and she would eventually understand. He told himself this as he pulled on his boots and descended the stairs 3 at a time. Halden Cray, his beta, was in the lower corridor. One look at Soren's face and the man straightened. "Where is Neve?" Soren asked. Halden's brow furrowed. "I assumed she was still in your chambers, Alpha." "She's not." A shadow crossed Halden's face. "I'll check the grounds." The grounds yielded nothing. The kitchens, the stables, the infirmary, the walled garden where she grew her medicinal herbs. Nothing. No one had seen her since the convocation the night before. Soren stood in the center of the courtyard as a cold weight settled in his stomach. Not worry. Not yet. Worse than worry. The first whisper of a question he did not want to ask himself. Halden returned with 2 trackers. Their faces told him what their words confirmed a moment later. Her scent trail leads south through the lower pasture, Alpha. It ends at the river. Ends? Soren repeated. She walked through the water. Downstream, at least a mile. Maybe more. We lost the trail where the current deepens past the mill. The tracker paused. She knew what she was doing. The cold in Soren's stomach hardened into a fist of cold certainty. She had deliberately broken her scent trail. That was not anger. That was not a walk to clear her head. That was someone who did not intend to be found. Find her, he said. His voice came out flat, controlled, a command stripped of everything beneath it. The trackers left. Halden remained, watching Soren with an expression the Alpha had never seen on his Beta's face before. It looked uncomfortably close to judgment. Say what you're thinking, Soren said. I'm thinking you should have told her, Halden replied, his voice even. Before the convocation, privately. The declaration had to be made formally, publicly, to carry weight. And now your Luna is gone. The word gone sat between them like a stone. Soren turned away. He climbed the stairs back to his chambers and stood in the doorway, looking at the empty room. Her scent was everywhere, woven into the curtains, the pillows, the air itself. And for the first time in their 3 years together, it didn't bring him peace. It brought him an ache, dangerously close to grief. He crossed to the bed and picked up the ring. It was still warm. Not from her hand. She had been gone too long for that. But from the morning light that had been falling across the pillow. He closed his fist around it and squeezed until the metal bit into his palm. On his way back downstairs, he passed old Matilda, the pack's senior healer, in the corridor. She was carrying a basket of dried herbs toward the infirmary, her weathered face creased with its usual expression of general disapproval. Matilda, Soren said, stopping. Did Neva visit you recently? In the last few days? The old healer's hands stilled on the basket. Her gaze flickered, quick and guarded, and Soren caught the sharp edge of a secret before she had even spoken. She came to see me 4 days ago, Matilda said carefully, for a consultation. What kind of consultation? Matilda regarded him with a look that had been making Alphas uncomfortable for 4 decades. The kind that falls under healer's confidence, Alpha. Soren stepped closer. My Luna is missing, Matilda. If there is something I need to know... The old woman held his gaze, and he watched a war play out behind her eyes. Duty against discretion. Loyalty to her Alpha against loyalty to the woman who had sat in her examination room and asked her to keep a secret. I would suggest, Matilda said slowly, each word chosen with surgical precision, that when you find her, and you should find her soon, you ask her yourself. She walked away before he could respond. Soren stood in the corridor, the ring pressed into his palm as the first true crack opened in his certainty that he had done the right thing. 3 months passed. The trackers found nothing. Neve had moved through water, through mud, through terrain that swallowed scent like a grave swallows sound. She had crossed out of Blackmere territory within the first night, a fact that both impressed and terrified the search parties, because it meant she had been moving fast, with purpose, with a plan she had clearly been carrying longer than anyone realized. Soren doubled the search, then tripled it. He sent wolves to every allied pack within 3 days' travel, described her in careful, clinical terms that stripped away everything personal and left only the useful details. Brown hair, green eyes, slim build, a healer's hands, scarred faintly along the fingertips from years of working with sharp instruments and dried roots. No one had seen her. It was as if Neve Ashford had walked into the river and simply ceased to exist. The pack noticed. Of course they noticed. Aluna's absence was not a quiet thing. She was the thread that ran through the daily life of the pack, the presence in the infirmary and the kitchens and the nursery, the woman who remembered every name, every child's birthday, every elder's aching joint. When she disappeared, the fabric of daily life developed a visible tear. The whispers started within days. By the second week, they had grown teeth. She left because of the Ven woman's child. She left because the Alpha humiliated her. She left because he chose a mistress's son over his own Luna. Soren heard every whisper. They landed like cuts, small and precise and accumulating. He said nothing. Daria Ven moved through the keep with the careful confidence of a woman who believed her position had just been cemented. She appeared at meals Neve had once presided over. She sat in chairs Neve had once occupied. She smiled at pack members who looked through her like she was made of glass. Soren watched this and felt nothing. That was the part that disturbed him most. Daria was the mother of his son, a child conceived during a brief, reckless entanglement 18 months ago when Neve had been away visiting the Southern Healers Conclave for 3 weeks, and Soren had been consumed by war grief and loneliness and the particular brand of foolishness that powerful men mistake for entitlement. He had told Neve about Daria before the child was born, had watched her face go white, then still, then carefully, terribly composed. She had not screamed, had not struck him, had asked 3 questions in a voice so controlled it barely qualified as human. When? How many times? Do you love her? Once. 3. No. Neve had nodded and left the room. She had returned an hour later with red-rimmed eyes and told him they would manage it. That the child was innocent and deserved a father. That she would find a way to accept what he had done if he could promise her it was over. He had promised, and he had meant it. And then the pressure had come from the Council of Elders, from Daria's family, from the pack's ancient obsession with bloodlines and firstborn sons and the terror of a throne without a clear successor. Neve had not produced an heir. The Ven boy existed. The political calculus was brutal and simple. But Soren had made the calculation without telling his wife, had weighed the pack's stability against her heart and decided the pack's stability mattered more, had stood in that hall and spoken those words while she sat 5 feet away, and he had not looked at her because some part of him had known that if he looked at her face while he said it, he would not have been able to finish. Now she was gone, and the victory felt like ash in his mouth. One night near the end of the 3rd month, Soren sat alone in their chambers and did something he had not done since she left. He lay down on her side of the bed. The sheets had been changed several times since her departure, but he could swear the ghost of her scent still lingered in the pillow. He buried his face in it and breathed, and the ache in his chest, the one he had been ignoring, burying, overriding with action and authority, broke open like a wound that had never properly closed. He missed her. Not the Luna, not the political partner, not the convenient presence. He missed Neve, the woman who talked to her herbs while she worked and never realized she was doing it. The woman who fell asleep mid-sentence and denied it in the morning. The woman who had looked at him on their mating night with an expression so open, so entirely without defense, that he had felt, for the first and only time in his life, that someone truly saw him and was not afraid. He had destroyed that. He had taken the one person who made him feel human and treated her like a political inconvenience. The next morning, Halden found Soren in the corridor outside old Matilda's door. "She won't tell me," Soren said. His voice was hoarse, like he had not slept, which was accurate. 4 days before the convocation, Neve went to see Matilda. The healer will not say why. She cites confidentiality. "And you want me to? I want you to find out what she's hiding." Halden hesitated. "Alpha, if Matilda is protecting something Neve asked her to keep private, perhaps—" Halden, The beta fell silent. Something made Neve run. Not just the declaration. She was hurt. Yes. Furious. Yes. But Neve has weathered worse than humiliation. She is the most resilient person I have ever known. Something else made her run, and Matilda knows what it is. Halden studied him for a long moment, then nodded and disappeared into the infirmary. He returned 12 minutes later. His face was different. Paler. His mouth pressed into a line that Soren had only seen once before, on the day they had buried Halden's brother. "Tell me," Soren said. "She was pregnant," Halden said. 6 weeks along. Neve was carrying your child the night you declared the Ven boy your heir. The corridor tilted. Soren put his hand against the wall, and for a terrible, suspended moment, the world narrowed to a single point of blinding, annihilating clarity. She had been pregnant, sitting there in the great hall, in the green dress, with the silver comb in her hair, carrying his child while he announced that another woman's child was his legacy. And she had said nothing. She had walked out. She had placed her ring on his pillow, and she had vanished into the dark with their baby growing inside her. Soren's legs buckled. He slid down the wall until he was sitting on the cold stone floor, his hands shaking, his vision blurring. Halden crouched beside him but did not touch him, because the sound coming from the Alpha's chest was not something a beta could comfort. It was the sound of a man realizing he had lost everything and earned every bit of it. Crest Hollow was the kind of place that existed between maps. A fishing village wedged into the crook of a rocky coastline, 6 days' hard travel from Blackmere territory, where the cliffs dropped into gray-green water and the wind carried the smell of salt and pine resin and a particular kind of cold loneliness that suited Neve just fine. She had arrived nearly 3 months ago, exhausted, starving, and so heartsick she could barely speak. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered woman named Petra, had taken one look at her and asked no questions, had given her a room above the tavern, a bowl of stew, and a blanket that smelled like wood smoke, had pointed her toward the village's aging herb woman the next morning and said, "Maren could use the help. She's 73 and her knees are giving up." Neve had introduced herself as Wren. The name came out of nowhere, or maybe it came from the small brown birds that clustered on the windowsill of her room each morning, pecking at crumbs and arguing with each other in a way that made her chest ache with homesickness for a home she could never return to. Old Maren, the village herbalist, was nothing like Matilda. Where Matilda was sharp-tongued and formidable, Maren was soft-spoken and patient, and had a habit of humming tunelessly while she worked that Neve found almost unbearably soothing. She accepted Neve's help without interrogation, asked nothing about where she came from, why her hands shook when she ground the valerian root, or why she sometimes stopped mid-task and went still, her gaze turning inward with an expression that hovered between wonder and grief. The pregnancy was progressing. Neve could feel the changes, subtle but undeniable. The nausea had eased into something manageable. Her appetite had returned with a vengeance that startled her. She was tired in a different way now, not the bone-deep exhaustion of heartbreak, but the heavy, drowsy fatigue of a body doing extraordinary work beneath the surface. She had not told anyone, not Petra, not Maren, not the fisherman's wife named Corabelle who had started bringing her fresh bread every morning for reasons that seemed to have no explanation other than pure, uncomplicated kindness. Neve was not accustomed to uncomplicated kindness. She had spent 3 years navigating the razor-edged politics of a pack where every gesture carried subtext and every smile concealed calculation. In Crest Hollow, people said good morning and meant it. They asked how she slept and waited for the answer. They left baskets of smoked fish on her doorstep and did not expect anything in return. It was disorienting. And slowly, painfully, it was becoming something she was afraid to name, something that felt like safety. her days settled into a rhythm. She woke early, before the village stirred, and walked the cliff path above the harbor. The wind off the water was sharp and clean and scoured away the dreams she carried from the night before. Dreams of Soren's face, of the great hall, of the exact quality of silence that had followed the words, "Heir to the Blackmere line." She worked in Marin's cottage through the mornings, sorting dried herbs, preparing tinctures, treating the steady trickle of villagers who arrived with coughs and splinters, and the particular kind of joint pain that came from hauling fishing nets in cold water. In the afternoons, she helped Petra in the tavern, wiping tables and carrying plates, and in the evenings, she sat on the cliff above the harbor and watched the sun drop into the sea and tried not to think about the man she had left behind. She failed at that last part consistently. The bond was still there, weakened by distance, stretched thin like a thread pulled taut across a continent, but present. She could feel it in her chest, a low, persistent ache that never quite faded, like a bruise pressed against a rib. Some nights it sharpened into something that stole her breath, and she would lie in her narrow bed above the tavern and press her face into the pillow and fight the pull, the desperate, irrational need to go back, to find him, to press her face against his chest and breathe him in until the ache stopped. She did not go back. She reminded herself why, every single time. She touched her stomach and remembered the great hall, the torchlight, the 400 faces turning toward her. She remembered the ring on the pillow and the cold dawn light, and the way the river water had numbed her feet as she waded downstream, erasing herself. She had left to protect her child. That was the truth she held onto when the bond pulled hardest. She would not raise her baby in a house where another child had already been named more important. She would not watch her son or daughter grow up knowing their father had chosen someone else's blood over theirs before they were even born. But some nights, when the wind died and the village went quiet and she could hear nothing but the distant rhythm of the waves, she missed him so badly it felt like dying. One afternoon in early autumn, a stranger came to Crest Hollow. He arrived on horseback, which was unusual. Crest Hollow was a village that traveled by foot and by boat. Horses meant money, and money meant outsiders, and outsiders in a village this small drew attention the way blood draws wolves. Neve was in Marin's cottage when she heard the hoofbeats on the cobblestones. Her chest tightened, an instinct she couldn't explain drawing her to the window. The rider was tall, dark-haired, wearing a traveling cloak dusted with road dirt. He dismounted in front of the tavern and stood for a moment, scanning the village square with a slow, searching gaze that made the hair on Neve's arms stand up. He was a wolf. She could smell it even from this distance, the unmistakable undercurrent of shifter beneath the human exterior. Not from Blackmere. The scent was wrong for that. But pack-born, trained, disciplined, the kind of wolf who moved through the world with a specific purpose. Wren? Old Marin appeared at her shoulder, peering through the window. "Someone you know?" "No," Neve said. Her voice came out steady, but her hand had moved to her stomach without her permission. "I've never seen him before." Marin said, in the tone of a woman who had lived 73 years and learned to hear the lies people told themselves. The stranger entered the tavern. Neve watched the door close behind him as the first crack split the fragile safety she had built around herself. That evening, Petra came to find her in the herb cottage. The innkeeper's broad face was troubled, her arms crossed over her chest in a way that meant she was choosing her next words carefully. "The man who arrived today," Petra said. "He's asking questions." Neve's hand stilled on the mortar. "What kind of questions?" "About a woman. Brown hair, green eyes, healer's hands. Possibly traveling alone, possibly in some kind of trouble." Petra paused. "Sound like anyone you know?" Neve set the pestle down carefully. Her pulse was climbing, a steady, insistent drumbeat in her throat. "What did you tell him?" "That I run a tavern, not an information service." Petra's expression softened. But he's staying the night, Ren, and he's not the type to stop asking. Neve closed her eyes. All this time. She had made it all this time, and now the world she had run from was reaching for her again. She looked at Petra, at the woman who had given her shelter without question, the weight of every lie she had told pressing down on her like stones. I need to leave, Neve said. In your condition? Petra asked. Neve froze. My condition? Petra gave her a look that was equal parts gentle and exasperated. Child, I've had 4 babies. I know what a pregnant woman looks like when she's trying not to look pregnant. She paused, and her voice dropped to something softer, fiercer. You're not going anywhere tonight. Not in the dark. Not on these roads. Not carrying what you're carrying. But the stranger is sleeping in a room with a lock on the outside that he doesn't know about, Petra said. Old building. Funny doors. He won't be wandering tonight. Despite everything, a sound escaped Neve that was almost a laugh. She pressed her hand over her mouth, and behind it, the sound turned into a half-choked sob. Who is looking for you, Ren? Petra asked. Or whatever your real name is. Neve swallowed hard. The lie sat in her throat like a bone. She wanted to tell the truth. Wanted to set down the weight of 37 days of pretending to be someone she wasn't. But if she told Petra who she was, she would have to explain who was looking for her. And if she explained that, she would have to say his name. And she was not sure she could say his name without breaking apart entirely. Someone I used to love, Neve said finally. Petra studied her for a long moment. Then she crossed the room, pulled Neve into a hug that smelled like bread flour and wood smoke, and the uncomplicated safety of a woman who had decided to protect someone simply because that someone needed protecting. Then he can look all he wants, Petra said against her hair. He won't find you here. But Neve, her face buried against Petra's shoulder, one hand resting low on her belly, knew that wasn't true. Because the stranger in the tavern was only the first. There would be more, and eventually, one of them would carry a scent she recognized, and then this small, quiet, borrowed life would end. She fell asleep that night thinking of Soren, not the man who had stood in the great hall and broken her world, the other Soren, the one who used to trace the line of her jaw with his thumb while she was falling asleep. So gently she almost believed he was memorizing her. The one who had whispered against her temple on their mating night, I don't know how to be soft, but I will learn for you. She dreamed of him, and in the dream, he was searching. Tearing through the dark, calling her name, his voice raw with something she had never heard from him before. It sounded like fear. The stranger left Crest Hollow the following morning. Neve watched from the upstairs window of the tavern as he mounted his horse, exchanged a few words with a fisherman mending nets near the dock, and rode north along the coast road until the fog swallowed him whole. She exhaled. Her hands were trembling against the windowsill, and she pressed them flat until they stopped. Gone, Petra said from the doorway, holding 2 mugs of broth. Funny door did its job. Neve took the mug and wrapped her fingers around the warmth. He'll report back. Whoever sent him, he'll tell them the village was a dead end, but they'll send someone else. Then we'll deal with someone else. Petra settled into the chair by the window with the unhurried calm of a woman who had weathered storms both literal and otherwise. Drink your broth. Neve drank. The warmth spread through her chest, and she let herself believe, just for a moment, that Petra was right. That they could keep dealing with it. That the walls of this small, salt-weathered village could hold against whatever was coming. She knew better, but the believing felt good. In the weeks that followed, she leaned harder into the rhythm of her new life. Old Marin's cottage became her sanctuary. The work was simple and honest, grinding herbs, mixing poultices, diagnosing the predictable ailments of a fishing community, and it steadied her in a way she desperately needed. It was Marin who finally said something about the pregnancy. They were side by side at the long wooden table, Neve sorting dried chamomile and Marin stripping bark from a willow branch, when the old woman set down her knife and said, without preamble, "How far along are you, child?" Neve's hands went still. She considered lying. The impulse was brief and futile. Marin had been delivering babies and reading bodies for longer than Neve had been alive. "Nearly 4 months," Neve said. "And the father?" The question sat between them like a held breath. Neve bit the inside of her cheek. "Not here," she said finally. "And not coming." Marin studied her for a long, quiet moment. Then she picked up her knife and resumed stripping bark. "The baby will need things," she said. "Clothes, a cradle, a proper blanket. We'll start preparing." That was all. No questions about who or why or what had gone so wrong that a pregnant woman had run to the edge of the world alone. Just the practical declaration that the baby was coming and would need to be received. Neve's eyes burned. She blinked the sting away and went back to the chamomile. 6 days' travel to the north, in the stone corridors of Blackmere Keep, a different kind of unraveling was underway. Soren had stopped sleeping. Not in the way of a man who couldn't find rest, but in the way of a man who refused it. Sleep meant stillness, and stillness meant thinking, and thinking meant the image that had carved itself permanently behind his eyes. Neve in the green dress, her hand on her stomach, the ring on the pillow. The pack felt his deterioration like a change in weather. His temper, always controlled, had become volatile. He snapped at advisors mid-sentence. He dismissed council meetings after 10 minutes. He stood at the window of his chambers for hours, staring south, and no one dared interrupt him. Halden managed the widening cracks as best he could, but even his steady composure was beginning to show strain. "The elders are asking questions," Halden said one evening, standing in the doorway of Soren's study. "About Neve, about the succession, about Daria." Soren didn't look up from the map spread across his desk. He had been studying every trade route, every river crossing, every forgotten village within a month's travel of Blackmere. "What about Daria?" "She's begun referring to herself as the Alpha's consort. She attended the provisioning meeting yesterday and tried to direct the allocation of winter stores." A low, dangerous heat moved through his chest. He looked up. "She did what?" "Elspeth turned her away, politely. But the precedent was set." Halden paused. "The pack sees a vacancy where a Luna should be Alpha. Someone is going to fill it, whether you intend them to or not." Soren's jaw clenched. He thought of Neve's chair in the great hall, empty for weeks now. Thought of Daria sitting in it, smiling, claiming what was not hers and never would be. "Summon Daria," Soren said. "Now." The confrontation was brief and brutal. Daria arrived in a gown Neve would have recognized, one that had been left behind in the Luna's wardrobe, and a dangerous cold settled over Soren when he saw it. "You are the mother of my recognized son," he told her, his voice stripped of everything except authority. "That is the full extent of your position. You are not Luna. You are not consort. You will not attend council meetings. You will not direct pack operations. And you will not touch my wife's belongings again." Daria's composure cracked for the first time since Neve had vanished. "Your wife left you," she said, her voice tight. "She abandoned her duties, her pack, and her Alpha. I am here. I stayed." "You stayed," Soren repeated, and the word landed like a blade. "Because you had somewhere to stay. She left because I gave her no reason not to." Daria's face went white. She left without another word, but the look in her eyes as she passed through the doorway was not defeat. It was calculation. That night, Soren returned to the map. He had been searching systematically, tracing concentric circles outward from Blackmere, and something about the southern coastal routes nagged at him. The trackers had searched east and west and north, following the major pack territories and trading roads. But south, below the river where Neve's trail had ended, the terrain turned wild. Rocky coastline, isolated fishing settlements, places that didn't appear on official maps because no one important had ever bothered to catalog them. Places a woman who did not want to be found would know to run toward. A trader had passed through Blackmere 3 days ago, carrying salted fish from a coastal village he'd called Crest Hollow. Soren had barely registered the name, but now, staring at the map, he traced the river south to where it met the coast and found a stretch of unnamed shoreline that sat exactly the right distance for a woman traveling fast and light on foot. He tapped the unmarked coast and a sharp certainty stirred beneath his ribs. Not the bond, which had been a dull, throbbing ache for weeks. Something sharper. Certainty. "Halden," he said without looking up. The beta appeared in the doorway as if he had been waiting. "Prepare 2 horses, provisions for a week." "You're going yourself," Halden said. It was not a question. "I should have gone myself from the beginning." "And the pack?" "You'll manage it." Soren paused, his hand still on the map. "If Daria makes another move in my absence, confine her to her quarters." Halden nodded slowly. "And when you find Neve? What then?" Soren stared at the unmarked stretch of coastline and did not answer, because the truth was he had no idea. He only knew that his wife was out there, carrying his child alone, and every day he spent behind these walls was a day he would never forgive himself for. He rode out before dawn, south toward the river, south toward the coast, south toward the woman he had broken and the child he did not yet know how to deserve. Soren smelled her before he saw the village. He had been riding for 5 days, following the coastline, stopping at every settlement, every farmstead, every cluster of houses clinging to the rocks above the waterline. At each one he described her, careful and clinical, the same words the trackers had used. Brown hair, green eyes, healer's hands. At each one, nothing. Then, on the afternoon of the 5th day, with the horses tired and his body aching and his certainty beginning to curdle into despair, the wind shifted. It came off the water, sharp with salt, and carried something beneath it. Faint, achingly familiar. Lavender, and beneath the lavender, the warm, unnamed thing he had never been able to identify that was simply and entirely Neve. His hands tightened on the reins. The bond, dormant for weeks, flared to life in his chest like a coal blown back into flame. He gasped, the sensation so acute it bordered on pain, and the horse beneath him shifted nervously. Crest Hollow appeared around the next headland. A scattering of stone cottages, a small harbor, fishing boats pulled up on the shingle. Smoke curled from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere behind a garden wall. It was the kind of place that looked like it had been here forever and would be here long after everyone currently living in it had turned to dust. Soren dismounted at the edge of the village and stood for a moment, his hand on the horse's neck, trying to slow the hammering of his heart. She was here. He could feel her through the bond, close, so close that his skin ached with the proximity. He walked into the village square. A few people glanced up from their work, curious but not alarmed. He was a stranger in a place that rarely saw them, but he was alone and his hands were empty and he carried no visible threat. He saw her. She was coming out of a cottage at the far end of the square, carrying a basket of dried herbs, her hair pulled back from her face, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. She was talking to someone behind her, an old woman in the doorway, and she was smiling. A small, distracted smile that Soren recognized from 1,000 mornings in their own chambers when she was thinking about something else entirely. Then he saw the curve of her stomach beneath the loose wool dress, and the world stopped. Nearly 5 months. Visible now, unmistakable, the swell of new life that she had been carrying alone, in hiding, in a village full of strangers, because he had made her home unbearable. Neve turned toward the square and saw him. The basket fell from her hands. Dried chamomile scattered across the cobblestones like confetti at a funeral. Her face went white, then red, then white again. She stepped back, one arm curving protectively around herself in the gesture he had never seen before, but recognized instantly for what it was. "No," she said. The word came out like a reflex, sharp and immediate. "No, no, no. Neve." His voice broke on her name. He hadn't expected that. He had rehearsed this moment for 5 days on horseback, had planned what he would say, how he would stand, how he would explain. None of it survived the sight of her. "You can't be here," Neve said, backing up a step. "You cannot be here. I had to find you." "You had to?" Her voice climbed, and he heard something beneath the anger that made his chest crack. Fear. She was afraid of him. "You had to find me, the way you had to declare another woman's child your heir, the way you had to stand in front of 400 people and tell them that your mistress's son was your legacy while I sat there carrying your baby, and you didn't even have the courage to look at me?" Every word landed like a strike. Soren stood motionless and let them hit because he deserved every single one. "Neve, I didn't know," he said. "About the baby. I swear to you, I didn't know. Because I hadn't told you yet." Her voice cracked, and her arms tightened around herself. "I was waiting for the right moment. I was going to tell you that week. I had it planned, Soren. I was going to make your favorite meal and sit you down and tell you that we were going to have a child, and instead, you stood up in that hall and you—" She couldn't finish. Her face crumpled, and she turned away from him, pressing her fist against her mouth the way she always did when she was trying not to cry. The sound she made was small and wounded, and it destroyed him. "I'm sorry," Soren said. The words felt pathetically inadequate, like trying to put out a fire with a handful of dust. "Neve, I am so sorry. Don't." She rounded on him, and her eyes were blazing even through the tears. "Don't you dare apologize like this is something words can fix. You didn't just hurt me, Soren. You erased me. In front of everyone. You told the entire pack that I wasn't enough. That what I could give you wasn't enough." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with the force of holding herself together. "Explain it to me, because I have spent 3 months trying to understand how the man I loved, the man I gave everything to, could sit me down beside him in that hall and shatter my life without even looking at me." Soren opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "You didn't look at me," she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper that was worse than the shouting. "Not once, through the entire declaration. You looked at everyone else in that room except me. Do you know what that felt like? Do you have any idea?" "I couldn't," Soren said, and the confession came out ragged, torn from somewhere deeper than his chest. "If I had looked at you, I wouldn't have been able to say it." The silence that followed was enormous. Neve stared at him, her face streaked with tears, her hand on her stomach, and he watched her absorb what he had just said. Watched her understand that he had known on some level that what he was doing was wrong, that he had known it would break her. And he had done it anyway. "Then why?" she whispered. "Why did you say it at all?" Before he could answer, the cottage door opened and 2 women stepped into the square. One was old, small, leaning on a cane. The other was broad-shouldered with flour on her apron and an expression that could have curdled milk at 20 paces. "Ren," the broad woman said, her gaze locked on Soren with undisguised hostility. "Is this man bothering you?" Neve wiped her face quickly. "Petra, it's... because if he is, I've got a rolling pin inside and 30 years of experience using it." Old Marin, standing beside Petra, said nothing. She simply looked at Soren with the calm, measuring gaze of a woman who had spent 7 decades learning to read people, and whatever she read in his face made her expression shift to something unexpectedly close to pity. "He's not bothering me," Neve said, her voice steadier now. "He's my husband." The word fell into the square like a stone into still water. Petra's eyebrows climbed her forehead. Old Marin nodded slowly, as if a puzzle she had been working on had finally clicked into place. "Your husband?" Petra repeated flatly. "The someone you used to love." Neve's jaw tightened. She did not correct the tense. Soren felt the words land and understood, with sickening clarity, that she had spoken about him in the past tense. Someone she used to love. Not someone she loved. Used to. "Perhaps," Marin said in her quiet way. "You should both come inside before the whole village hears your business." They sat in Marin's cottage, on opposite sides of the long wooden table, and the distance between them felt like a continent. Petra stood in the corner with her arms crossed, radiating protective hostility. Marin made tea, because that was apparently what you did when a missing Luna's alpha husband appeared in your village and the world was falling apart. "I'm not going back," Neve said. Her voice was calm now, the terrifying calm of a decision already made. "I won't raise this child in a house where another child has already been named above them." "The declaration can be reversed," Soren said. "And then what? You humiliate Daria's son the way you humiliated me? He's an infant, Soren. He didn't choose any of this." Soren's hands clenched on the table. She was right. She was right. And the trap he had built with his own stupidity closed around him a little tighter. "Neve, please, come home. We'll find a way to—" "Home?" The word came out sharp enough to cut. "That place hasn't felt like home since the night you stood in the Great Hall and made me invisible." Soren flinched. Actually, visibly flinched, and Neve watched the pain move across his face and as a complicated ache twisted through her chest, because even now, even after everything, some part of her hated seeing him hurt. She pressed that part down as hard as she could. "I need you to leave," she said. "I can't." "You can. You rode here. You can ride back. Neve." His voice dropped low, rough, strained with the effort of containment. "The bond is—" "I know what the bond is doing," she interrupted. "I've been living with it for 3 months. I've been lying awake at night feeling you like a wound that won't close. I know exactly what it's doing, and I am choosing to endure it rather than go back to a place where I am second to another woman's child." The silence in the cottage was suffocating. Petra looked at the floor. Marin looked at Neve. Soren looked at his hands, spread flat on the table, and said nothing for a very long time. "Then I'll stay," he said finally. Neve's head snapped up. "What?" "If you won't come back, I'll stay. Here. Near you. Until you're ready to talk. However long that takes. You're the alpha of the largest pack on the continent. You can't just stay in a fishing village." "Watch me," Soren said, and for the first time since he had arrived, a new light moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, not desperation. Iron stubbornness that had made him alpha in the first place turned now, with devastating focus, entirely on her. Neve stared at him, the ground beneath her shifting in a way she had not anticipated. "You're out of your mind," she said. "Possibly," he agreed, "but I'm not leaving." In the corner, Petra muttered something under her breath that sounded like, "Well, this is going to be interesting." It was not the word Neve would have chosen. He stayed. Neve had expected him to last a day, maybe 2, before the pull of his pack and his responsibilities, and his throne, dragged him back north. She had underestimated him. Or perhaps she had forgotten this particular quality, the relentless, infuriating persistence that made him impossible to outlast in any argument, any negotiation, any war of wills. Soren rented a room above the chandler's shop at the far end of the village, a narrow space with a low ceiling and a cot that was comically small for a man his size. He did not complain. He did not press her. He simply existed in Crest Hollow, this enormous, out-of-place alpha wolf in a village of fishermen and salt wives. And he waited. It drove Neve absolutely mad. He was a constant presence in her blood. The bond, muted by distance for months, had roared back to full strength with his proximity. Every morning she woke knowing exactly where he was, could feel his heartbeat like a second pulse in her own chest, steady and patient and infuriatingly present. She caught his scent on the sea wind, in the marketplace, on the cliff path where she walked each dawn. Pine and iron and the warm undertone of him that made her throat tighten, and her wolf press forward with a longing she refused to indulge. She avoided him. He let her. He did not follow her or corner her or demand conversation. He simply went about his days with a quiet discipline that unnerved her, because it was not the behavior of a man performing patience. It was the behavior of a man who had decided to earn something and understood it would take time. The village watched with undisguised fascination. Petra reported daily, "Your husband chopped wood for old Garrett this morning. 3 hours. Didn't say a word, just showed up and started swinging. Your husband fixed the leak in the Chandler's roof. Niels didn't ask him to. He just climbed up there. Your husband pulled Corabelle's boy out of the harbor after the fool child fell off the dock. Jumped in fully clothed. Ruined his only spare shirt." Neve listened to these reports with her jaw set, and her hands busy with whatever herb work was in front of her, and said nothing. But each small account settled into her chest like a pebble into water, sinking slowly, building a weight she could not ignore. On the 4th day of his stay, Neve was working alone in Marin's cottage when a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grip the table to stay upright. The room tilted, the light going strange and smeary, and for a terrible moment she thought she was going to be sick on the carefully sorted pile of dried thyme. The door opened. She didn't have to look up to know it was him. The bond carried his alarm to her like a signal fire, the sharp spike that cut through his carefully maintained distance like a knife through cloth. "I'm fine," she said to the time. "You're gray," he said from the doorway. "It's the lighting." Neve. She looked up and immediately regretted it, because his face was open in a way she had not seen since before the declaration. The mask was gone, the alpha composure, the controlled blankness. What remained was raw concern, undisguised and devastating, and it cracked her open. "Sit down," he said, moving toward her. "Please." She sat, mostly because her legs were making the decision for her. He crossed to the water pitcher and poured a cup with hands that were not entirely steady. He set it in front of her and then stepped back, maintaining the distance she had established, even now. "Have you been eating?" he asked. "Yes." "Sleeping?" "When I can." She took a sip of the water. The dizziness was receding, replaced by the bone-deep fatigue that had become her constant companion. "The baby makes demands. My body is doing its best to keep up." His eyes dropped to her stomach, and she watched an emotion cross his face that was too layered to name. Pain, yes. Guilt, always. But beneath both of those, something fragile and stunned that looked like wonder. "Can I—" He stopped himself, his hand half raised toward her, then dropped it back to his side. "Never mind." "You can ask," Neve said, and was surprised by how gentle her own voice sounded. "Is the baby healthy?" "Marin says so, yes. Strong heartbeat. Growing well." She paused. "Marin thinks it might be a girl." Something shattered behind his eyes. Not painfully, more like ice breaking on a river in spring, the slow, inevitable fracture of something that had been frozen too long. His mouth worked, and for the first time in her memory, Soren Blackmere, alpha of the most powerful pack on the continent, the man who had ended 2 border wars through sheer force of will, could not speak. "A girl," he managed finally, and his voice came out wrecked. Neve looked at him, at this man she had loved and hated and missed and fled from, as the anger in her chest shifted to make room for something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the precursor to it, the crack in the wall through which forgiveness might eventually enter. "Why did you really do it, Soren?" she asked quietly. "I've heard the political answer. The council, the elders, the bloodline obsession. I want the real reason. Why did you choose Daria's son?" He sat down across from her. His hands were flat on the table, the way they always were when he was trying to hold himself together. "Because I was afraid," he said. Neve waited. The council's pressure was real. The elders were relentless. But I could have fought them. I've overruled them before on harder matters. He swallowed. "The truth is that I used the political excuse because it was easier than admitting the real thing." "Which was?" He looked at her, and his eyes were raw. "I don't know how to be a father. Daria's boy was already born, already real, already someone else's responsibility in a way that felt manageable. I could claim him politically without having to raise him day by day, without having to be present in the way a father actually has to be present." He paused, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "I was terrified of having a child with you. Because I love you. And because if I failed our child the way my father failed me, if I turned into him, I would never forgive myself. And I knew you would never forgive me either." The cottage was very quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, a gull cried once and went silent. "So you pushed me away before you could disappoint me," Neve said. "I destroyed the thing I was trying to protect." He laughed, a short, hollow sound. "My father would have appreciated the irony." Neve stared at him across the table, across 3 months of silence and separation and the terrible ache of the bond stretched thin, and as a wall in her chest gave way. Not completely, not all at once, but a shifting, like a wall developing its first structural fault. "You should have told me," she said. "Any of it, all of it. I would have understood the fear, Soren. I would have helped you through it. Instead, you made the decision alone and let me find out in the worst possible way." "I know. I sat in that hall carrying your daughter and listened to you tell 400 people that another woman's son was more important. I know." His voice cracked on the second word. "And I can't just forgive that because you're sorry. Sorry isn't enough. Being here isn't enough. Chopping wood for strangers and fixing roofs isn't enough." "Then tell me what is." He leaned forward, and the desperation in his face was the most honest thing she had ever seen from him. "Tell me what to do, Neve, because I will do anything. Anything at all." She opened her mouth to answer, but the words never came. Because outside the cottage the sound of hoofbeats broke through the quiet. Not one horse but several, moving fast along the coast road, and a cold blade of instinct slid through Neve's chest. She knew, before Petra burst through the door with her face flushed and her eyes wide, that the riders were not from Crest Hollow. "Wolves," Petra said, breathing hard. 6 of them, armed, coming from the northeast, and they're wearing the Ven crest. Soren was on his feet before the last word left Petra's mouth, and the man standing in the cottage was no longer the penitent husband. He was the Alpha, every line of his body gone hard with the lethal focus she had seen only in moments of genuine danger. "Stay here," he said to Neve. "Do not leave this cottage." "Soren, what?" "Daria's family," he said, his voice flat and controlled. "They want you to stay gone. If you come back with my heir, their grandson's claim evaporates." The blood drained from Neve's face. Her arms folded instinctively around her middle. "Stay here," Soren repeated, and the command in his voice was absolute. "I will handle this." He crossed to the door, and Neve watched the shift happen, the transformation from the broken, honest man who had just confessed his deepest fear into the ruthless, calculating warlord who had united the northern pacts through sheer force. It happened in the space of a single breath, and it was terrifying. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, and Neve pressed both hands against her stomach and listened to 6 armed wolves ride into the village where she had built her fragile, borrowed peace. Soren stepped into the village square and counted 6 wolves. They had dismounted near the well, their horses breathing hard from a fast ride, their cloaks bearing the embroidered silver stag of House Ven. They were young, hard-faced, armed with short swords, and the particular brand of arrogance that came from serving a wealthy family that believed money was a substitute for rank. The one at the front was older than the rest, broad through the chest, a scar running from his temple to his jaw, his hand resting on the pommel of his blade with the easy familiarity of a man who had used it often and without hesitation. "You're a long way from Ven territory," Soren said. The scarred wolf's eyes narrowed. He had clearly not expected to find the Alpha of Blackmere standing in a fishing village at the edge of the world, and the recalculation happening behind his eyes was visible. "Alpha Blackmere," the man said carefully. "We weren't informed you'd be here." "Evidently? Who sent you?" A pause. The other 5 wolves shifted, exchanging glances. The scarred one straightened. "Lord Ven extends his concern for the stability of the succession. He sent us to ensure that certain complications do not arise." "Complications," Soren repeated, and the word came out quiet, which was worse than loud, because quiet from an alpha of Soren's rank was a warning that most wolves had the instinct to heed. The scarred wolf did not heed it. "The woman. The former Luna. Lord Ven believes it would be best for everyone if she remained settled. Away from Blackmere. Away from politics. Best for everyone," Soren said. "Or best for Lord Ven's grandson." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Behind the Ven wolves, fishermen were emerging from their cottages, drawn by the hoofbeats and the tension that hung in the air like a coming storm. Neve's people. The ones who had taken her in without question and given her a place to heal. They carried no weapons, but they stood in their doorways and watched with the solid, unmoving resolve of people defending their own. Petra appeared at the edge of the square, rolling pin in hand, flanked by Corabelle and 2 weathered fishermen built like the boats they sailed. Old Maren stood in her doorway, leaning on her cane, her expression utterly serene in a way that suggested she had seen worse than 6 armed wolves and had not been impressed then either. "You will leave this village," Soren said, his voice carrying the full weight of his rank. It was not a request. It was the voice of the man who had brought 5 warring packs to heal and forged a kingdom from their ashes. It pressed down on the square like a physical force, and 4 of the 6 Ven wolves took an involuntary step backward. The scarred one held his ground. "Lord Ven's orders were clear, Alpha. With respect, his interests in this matter are... His interests are irrelevant." Soren stepped forward, and the air around him changed. Neve, watching from behind the cottage window where she had been told to stay, sensed the shift through the bond. The dominance rolling off him was staggering, a wave of authority so absolute it made her wolf want to bare her throat from 30 feet away. "Every wolf in this kingdom answers to me, including you, including Lord Ven. And if he believes he can send armed men to threaten my mate and my unborn child, then Lord Ven has made a miscalculation that I will correct personally." The word mate landed in the square like a thunderclap. The scarred wolf's composure cracked. His hand dropped from his sword, and Neve saw the precise moment he understood that this was not a political negotiation. This was an alpha standing between a threat and his bonded mate, and no amount of Ven gold was worth what would happen next if they did not leave. "We meant no disrespect, Alpha," the scarred wolf said, and his voice had changed entirely. "We were not told she is my mate. She is my Luna. She is carrying my child, and you are leaving. Now." They left. Quickly, efficiently, with the focused urgency of men who had just realized how close they had come to something they would not have survived. The hoofbeats receded along the coast road, and the square fell quiet. Soren stood motionless until the sound had faded entirely. Then his shoulders dropped. The alpha composure drained away, and what remained was a man standing alone in a village square, exhausted and hollowed out, and shaking slightly with the aftermath of adrenaline. The cottage door opened. Neve stepped out. "I told you to stay inside," he said without turning around. "You did," she agreed. "I chose not to." He turned. His eyes found hers, and what she saw in them was not triumph or satisfaction. It was terror. The raw, uncontrolled terror of a man who had just confronted the possibility that someone might have hurt the people he could not survive losing. They could have, but they didn't. Because of you. She crossed the square toward him. Each step felt enormous, weighted with 3 months of anger and grief and longing and the impossible, stubborn love that had refused to die, no matter how hard she had tried to starve it. She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough to feel the bond humming between them, warm and urgent and undeniable. "You called me your mate," she said. "You are my mate. You called me your Luna. You are my Luna. You have always been my Luna." His voice broke on the word always, and she watched him fight to hold himself together and fail. "Neve, I will spend the rest of my life earning back what I destroyed. I know that. I know sorry isn't enough. I know being here isn't enough. But I need you to know that there has never been a moment, not one, when you were not the only thing that mattered." "Then prove it," Neve said. "But not here, and not to me. I already know what you feel, Soren. I can feel it through the bond. I've always been able to feel it." She paused, and her voice steadied into something fierce and clear. "Prove it to them. Stand in the same hall where you broke me and put it right. In front of the same 400 wolves, with the same formality and the same weight. Tell them what you just told 6 armed strangers in a fishing village. Tell them I am your mate and your Luna, and that our daughter will never, ever be second to anyone." Soren stared at her. A cascade of emotion moved through his expression, too fast and layered to catalog, and then his hand moved to his chest, to the pocket over his heart. He pulled out the silver ring, the one she had left on his pillow, the one he had been carrying against his skin for 3 months. "I've had this with me every day," he said, "every single day since you left." Neve looked at the ring, and the tears she had been fighting spilled over. She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger with the same trembling hands that had put it there 3 years ago, and when the metal settled against her skin, a lock inside her chest turned. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the door to it, swinging open. He pulled her against him carefully, one arm around her back, and the other hand cradling the curve of her stomach, and she buried her face against his chest and let herself cry. Not the controlled, suffocated sobs of the night she had left. These were different, louder, messier. The tears of a woman letting go of something she had been carrying alone for too long. "Take me home," she said against his shirt. And he did. The great hall of Blackmere Keep looked exactly the same. The same long banners, black and silver. The same torchlight catching the stone walls. The same 400 wolves assembled in their seats, watching the front of the room with the same expectant silence. Neve stood at the high table in a gown of deep blue, her hand resting on the visible swell of her stomach, and felt the ghost of the last time she had sat in this room press against her chest. But beside her, Soren's hand was wrapped around hers, and this time, he was looking at her. Only at her. He stood. The hall went quiet, and Soren Blackmere, alpha of the northern packs, did something no alpha in living memory had done before. He apologized, publicly, to his Luna, to his pack, and to the son of Daria Ven, whose innocent life had been used as a weapon in a decision that should never have been made without his mate's voice beside his own. He spoke of fear, of failure, of the particular cowardice of a powerful man who would rather make a wrong decision alone than admit to the woman he loved that he was terrified of becoming a father. His voice did not waver. His eyes did not leave Neve's face. "My Luna carries my daughter," he said, and the hall held its breath. "This child and all children of this house will be raised with equal love and equal standing. But let no one in this room mistake my meaning." He paused, and his hand tightened around Neve's. "There is one Luna. There has only ever been one, and I will spend the rest of my life making certain she never doubts that again." The hall erupted, not in murmurs this time, but in something louder, rawer, the sound of 400 wolves who had watched their Luna vanish and their alpha unravel and had been holding their breath for months, finally exhaling. Neve looked up at Soren, and he looked down at her, and in the noise and the torchlight and the overwhelming tide of the moment, she smiled, small, real, the first true smile she had given him since the night she had left. He smiled back, and his was not small at all. Months later, their daughter was born in the same chambers where Neve had once placed a ring on a pillow and walked into the dark. Soren held the baby in his arms, this tiny, impossibly fragile person, and the expression on his face was one Neve had never seen before. Not the alpha, not the warlord, not the politician or the king. Just a man, holding his daughter, terrified and overwhelmed and so full of love it was pouring out of him like light through cracked glass. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is," Neve agreed. Then she added, "And if you ever make a major life decision without telling me again, I will take her and disappear so thoroughly that no tracker, no map, and no bond on Earth will find us. Are we clear?" Soren looked at her. His eyes were wet. His smile was devastating. "Crystal clear, my Luna," he said. Neve settled back against the pillows and watched her husband hold their daughter in the warm morning light, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt no urge to run. She was home. She was seen. And she was never going to be invisible again.